Hello, everyone. Welcome to Voices of the Vessel. I'm Shelby, the Director of Marketing for the Badger, the Lake Michigan Car Ferry. This podcast is dedicated to highlighting the people and voices from over the years who have made the Badger what she is today, as she is celebrating 70 years of service. This podcast is brought to you in partnership with Pier Ludington and Visit Manitowoc, our wonderful port cities. Thank you all for joining us today. I am very excited and honored to have on today's show Mike Braybrook, who is retired from the Car Ferry, spent many years here and sharing his story of how he got started and what he loved about the Badger. So Mike, it's great to have you join us today.
That's good to be here.
Yes, and so tell us, when did you start working at the Car Ferry? How did you end up as part of the C&O Railway?
Well, we go back to the very beginning. When I was a kid, I got interested in ships after we took a family trip up with the Soo Locks, and I found those huge ships to be very impressive. We also had a cabin over by Irons. Remember that?
Oh yeah, yep.
And we would come over to Ludington sometimes on the weekends, and of course you got to drive down to the lake, drive down to the harbor, and I would see the car ferry sitting in the harbor, little knowing that I would work on it one day. When I got older, it was just natural that I joined the Navy.
Oh, yes,
keep
indeed.
on the ships, you got to keep on the ships. So I spent 4 years in the Navy. I was on 2 ships there. After I got out, I decided I wanted to sail for a career. So I got my merchant seaman's papers.
Wonderful.
And I had to come to Ludington to get them because they used to have a marine inspection office.
That's right, they did.
It's where Trailhead is right now.
Yep.
Trailhead shop. That's where everything dealing with the Coast Guard was done. Writing for your tickets, which are your ratings, your endorsements.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Everything was done there. And then a few years later, they closed it down. So luckily I had all my tickets and whatnot, because after that, everybody had to go to Cleveland.
Oh, wow.
Toledo.
Oh.
They shut down Cleveland also. You had to go to Toledo.
Wow, yeah, that'd be quite a ways to travel. But thank you for your service, and how cool that you could come to Ludington and do that.
So I got my first car ferry job through the Union Hall on James Street. That was National Maritime Union Hall. And I picked up a relief fireman's job. That was my very first one. I was on the City of Milwaukee out of Muskegon. Now after that job, I went back through the hall, and they said there was a waiter's job in the crew's mess on the City of Midland for C&O.
Oh.
So Mike says, okay. Now, I already had tickets that I was able to write using my Navy time. I didn't have to work white or coal passer for 1.5 years to get my time into the Coast Guard.
Nice.
The Navy allowed you to write oiler, water, tender fire.
Yeah, for sure.
Right away. I had those tickets in hand. And I wanted to go into engineering, but they said, we don't have any openings in engineering right now. So if you want something just to keep you going, we got jobs in the steward's department. So I says, well, okay, I'll take whatever I can get. So for a couple of weeks, I worked on all 3 boats in the steward's department. I ended up back on the City of Midland as a waiter in the officer's mess. And the chief engineer came in for breakfast one morning, and I asked him how long he figured it would be before I could get down into engineering. And he looked at me and he says, I'm short-handed ticket, people. What the heck are you doing up here serving pancakes?
Oh my gosh, yeah, so wow.
He had a little talk with personnel, and the next day I was down in the engine room.
That fast, wow.
Yeah, just like that. So I spent the whole summer bouncing from boat to boat, relieving guys for their time off. I was single, it didn't matter to me. I only had 4 days off from middle of May till, when was it? Probably 1st of October.
Wow.
4 days off.
That's a commitment.
Well, I was here to work to make money. Anyway.
Understandable.
During that time, when I was in the steward's department, I worked as a waiter, pantryman, and a flicker boss.
Oh.
The flicker boss is the porter that takes care of engineering crew quarters. That's his job, so they called him the flicker boss. then when I didn't have to work in the stewards department anymore, when I got down in the engine room, then I worked as a coal passer, fireman, a water tender, and an oiler. Now, I didn't start working junior engineer until Lake Michigan Carferry took over.
Oh, okay.
It was a seniority thing. I didn't have enough time to work junior engineer on the C&O boats or even MWT because
gotcha.
it's a seniority thing. You can't move up until somebody retires.
Understandable,
or whatnot.
yeah.
So I worked on the Grand Trunk boats. Like I said, very first job was on the Grand Trunk boats. So I sailed on the Madison and the City of Milwaukee out of Muskegon.
Very cool.
Then on the C&O, when I came up here and I finally got a steady job, then I stayed on the C&O and I worked on the Spartan, the City of Midland, and the Badger.
Neat. That's awesome.
And also, whenever I was laid off, there was some layoff time, especially you get into the winter if you're low seniority, and they would knock a boat down.
Oh, yes, I've heard about this. Yeah.
For a few years, 2 boats year-round, and they only brought the 3rd boat out in the summertime to pick up the passenger traffic.
Oh, yep, that makes a lot of sense. That's when all the
young guys with no seniority, that's when you get a job.
Yeah.
So when I was laid off, I would go out on the ore boats.
Oh, neat.
I never worked for Interlake, but I did work for Ogilvy Norton and United States Steel, so I worked on 3 boats. Different times.
Yeah.
And I know you asked before what my favorite boat was. Mm-hmm. My favorite boat was the City of Midland.
A lot of people say that. I wish I could have experienced her in all of her glory myself. That I've seen a lot of pictures that I would have to agree with you of just how beautiful she is. That I'm a little partial to the Badger, but the City of Midland was amazing as well.
But I wasn't looking at it from a
passenger expect.
I wasn't looking at it from an architectural point of view.
True.
I was looking at it from a 24-year-old young guy's point of view. The reason that a lot of guys gravitated to the City of Midland was it was the party boat.
Oh, yeah. I have heard that before.
Now, the older guys would gravitate to the Badger and the Spartan because they were on the Kewanee run and the Milwaukee run. Those guys, they were getting older. They didn't care about
probably more of a schedule and things.
Well, they didn't care about going up the street. Up the street means going up to have a beer.
Oh, true.
Those guys stayed on those runs because they were the newer boats. Oh, I got seniority. I'm going to be on one of the big new boats.
Yeah.
And they didn't go uptown much. Well, the City of Midland she was on the steady Manitowoc run this summer. So the young guys would bid jobs to get on the City of Midland because the very first bar was 9 minutes from the dock.
9 minutes exact.
9 minutes.
I like how you know that.
plus some things you remember. Plus, within walking distance up the main drag, there were 7 more bars that you could get to within walking distance. It's Wisconsin, after all.
I was just going to say, it's Wisconsin.
So that's why, you could say that was my favorite boat. A lot of other young guys at the time.
Yeah, I've heard similar stories.
Did you? And winter sailing. That was a big thing with the C&O because it's year-round.
Exactly. What was it like in the winter?
Well, winter sailing was a whole different animal.
I can imagine.
In November and December, there would be some pretty good storms. And once in a while, there would be one bad enough that we would have to hold in for weather, which was nice because holding in for weather, if you weren't on watch, you could go home.
Oh, true.
You'd have time to spend, more time to spend at home.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, the engine crew lived in the flicker underneath the car deck. And after the ice started to form, you could hear it bumping and scraping down along the hull.
Oh.
Like, the bulkhead in your room, just on the other side of that.
For sure.
It's the ship's hull, and there's, 2-ton blocks of ice scraping down the hull. It was an odd feeling.
I bet that would probably be pretty loud.
Yeah. Well, when you're sleeping, you get used to that kind of stuff.
Oh, I'm sure.
When usually you're coming into port, you're awake anyway.
True.
So it wouldn't bother you.
Yeah, that would definitely be a unique thing to experience.
Well, that's endemic with winter sailing. The Badger doesn't deal with today
Right.
in her present schedule.
Yeah, I always thought it'd be really cool to experience at least just one time, although I don't like the cold weather that much, so I'll take your word for it.
Well, once in a while we would get stuck on the ice, and we'd have to wait for another boat to come break us out. Now, in the city of Midland, we broke all the blades off the starboard propeller one time. When we
Really?
got into some real heavy ice. Actually, one blade actually broke off, stuck in the hull, and as the other three came around, they would hit it, and each in turn would break off.
Oh, wow.
No, a car ferry in the ice with only one propeller is useless.
Exactly.
You can't maneuver.
Right.
You got to have both propellers. Well, there we sat, one propeller stuck in the ice. Well, the Spartan was coming in from Milwaukee, and the plan was that she was going to come around us, break up the ice, loosen it up so she could help us get back into the harbor. But she was maybe 3 miles out from Ludington, from the break walls, and she got stuck in the ice.
Oh my
It
gosh.
was heavy pack ice. Back when we used to have real winters.
Right. Yeah, we don't have those as much anymore. I've never heard that story about breaking the blades off the propeller. That's something.
Well, she got stuck, could not come to break us out. That was the only time that I know of that we ever had to call in an icebreaker.
Really? Wow.
And Mackinac, the original Mackinac.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
She came in to break us out. That was the only time that I ever heard. Maybe well before my time they might have, but I don't think so. That's the only time that I know of that the icebreaker had to come to break us out.
But that's pretty impressive, though, when you think about the longevity of all the car ferries in and out.
And another thing that happened during the wintertime, like I told you about having storms, heavy weather. One time we had a heavy weather captain, and this wasn't on the City of Midland, this was on the Badger. By heavy weather captain, that means they'll go out in anything. They don't care.
Oh, yes. I've heard.
It's all about the company.
Yeah.
It's all about the company.
Time is money, and
Time is money. Get that freight across the lake, and they'd make a name for themselves. Heavy weather captain. Yeah, that was a badge of honor.
oh yes, I've heard some of those stories.
So anyway, one mid-November day, we had come into Ludington ahead of a freshening wind out of the west. We tied up a number 2 slip. When the switch engine was unloading the boat, we got news that a train was coming into Ludington with our load had been delayed, so it wouldn't be coming into town until the following morning. It was good news for the crew because it meant we had, if you're off watch, you could go home for the night if you're local. If they didn't live nearby, they would maybe catch a movie or go hit the bar scene, not have to worry about being back to the boat in 2 hours, which is the usual schedule.
Oh, for sure.
So the wind had been picking up all night, and by morning, heavy waves were breaking over the break walls. That's what they're for.
Exactly.
Now, once the boat had been loaded and the crew was all aboard, the captain decided he was going to go out of the harbor. And his very words were, "We're going to stick our nose out into it and see how it is."
Wow.
Well, he figured he could go through anything. Stick our nose out into it. So I had the 4-day watch. I'd been up since 3:15 a.m., so I decided to turn in and get some sleep. And Kopi, the fireman, he was on the same watch as I was, and he got off watch, went to his room, which is right across from mine. In the winter, anytime the boat was going to be in rough seas, the car handlers had to put up jacks and chains on all the rail cars.
Oh, yes. Yep.
Now, normally the captain wouldn't leave the slip until all the cars had been secured, but that day, for some odd reason, he decided to go before he got word that all the jacks and chains were up.
Oh, goodness.
So he decided to leave and didn't get to word. Well, there was one car that the car handlers hadn't got to yet. But they didn't have any jacks and chains on it at all. Now, this car was in the outboard wing.
Oh.
You got the 2 centers, and then you got the 2 outboard rails.
Yep.
It was in the outboard rail. And between that car and the flicker door, which is a sliding door, goes down into living quarters, that's where there were 2 vehicles parked. Now, the two vehicles, one was a brand new Pontiac Bonneville.
Oh, wow.
And it only had 400 miles on it. The other one was a pickup. And that pickup had all the antiques and stuff that the family didn't trust with Mayflower. Now, they were moving from Michigan to Nebraska. And everything that they didn't trust with Mayflower, they had in the pickup.
Of course. Oh, no.
Well, as the boat went out through the breakwalls, it started to pitch. And I could feel the vibration of the waves hitting the bow. About a mile out in the lake, the captain decided the seas were worse than he expected.
Oh, goodness.
And he decided to haul around to go back into the harbor. Well, when you haul around, now you're exposing yourself to those heavy waves coming in. So now the boat starts to rock and roll.
That makes sense,
Very, very heavy. And as it started to come around, I could feel it rolling heavy, and I could hear the rail cars up above creaking and groaning against their restraints. Of course, there was that one rail car the car handlers hadn't yet secured, and it began to tilt back and forth on the rails. With one wild roll of the boat, the rail car swung against the ship side, bounced back in the other direction, and it fell completely over on its side, and it crushed both those vehicles.
Oh, my goodness. And I've heard of this crushed car. That there are, I've seen pictures that it's crushed.
It crushed right down to the height of an engine block.
And how high is an engine block?
I'm going to guesstimate about 25 inches.
Yeah.
That's about how.
Because this is a pretty crushed car, the picture I've seen.
Yeah, they were pretty smashed. Well, down in the flicker, we heard this horrendous crash overhead.
That was my next thought of how loud would that have been underneath?
Well, something like that, you don't miss that. Now, that huge crash overhead caused me to jump out of my bunk and to see what the heck happened. Now, across the hall, Kopi, he also jumped out of his bed. And he jumped out through the door, and he was standing there wearing a T-shirt and his BVDs, and his eyes were like, I've never seen eyes so big. Well, I quickly pulled on some pants and shoes, and I ran up the stairs. And I slid the door open to the car deck. As soon as you slide it open, right there is the top of the rail car.
Oh my gosh.
It wasn't quite touching it, but it was so close you couldn't get out.
Wow, what a safety hazard. Like, that's crazy.
Well, there are escape hatches in the front.
Right.
There are other ways to get out, which we had to use to get out to go on watch.
Right.
Because we couldn't get out there.
So what was the rail car carrying?
Pellet out.
Oh, yes, that would have...
That's used for ice removal.
Exactly.
And I believe it was 100 or 110 ton car.
That would be a mess and a half to clean up.
Well, what they did was eventually the Dow Chemical sent a crew over. Mm-hmm. And they opened up the hoppers on the bottom, and the only way they could get it out was people with shovels.
Wow.
They had to climb in with shovels, and they'd shovel it out into wheelbarrows, and the wheelbarrows would dump into a Michigan front end loader, which they carried off the boat. It took 2 days.
Yeah, that would take a long time. That's a lot of pellet out.
It took 2 days for them to shovel it out.
Wow.
But anyway, back on the boat. The first thing I noticed when I pulled that door open was the smell of gasoline.
Oh no!
And of course, the gas tanks on both vehicles were breached.
I didn't even think about that. Yeah.
So the gasoline was running out on the deck. I could smell that, and at the same time, I could hear a muffled car horn. Down underneath it. Well, when that happens, it means it's shorted out. The battery is still connected with the car horn.
Oh, yeah.
And it's shorted out. That's two things you don't want, a shorted wire and gasoline.
Oh, for sure.
Well, the gasoline with an open battery, any spark, except that gasoline that's on the deck, catch on fire.
Yeah, oh my gosh.
That's not a good combination.
I didn't even think about that part of it.
So I quickly slammed the flicker door closed, and I enlisted the help of Kopi and a couple other guys who were up by then finally to pull out some fire hoses, and we rigged them up right next to the sliding door. In case there was a fire, we could pull it open and run the hoses out. So
that's a good thought.
That's about all we could do.
Yeah.
Well, the boat had stopped rolling and started pitching instead, because now we're like this. Instead of rolling, we're pitching because we're heading back into the harbor.
Wow.
So when we headed back in, we tied back up the slip, and then the crew and the office people came over. And they swarmed around the toppled rail car assessing the damage. And that's when they got a hold of Dow Chemical. Hey,
Yeah.
you need to do something about this.
Hey, come give us a hand.
So they did come over, like I said before. They had to shovel it out. And it took 2 days, and they had to bring in a specialized crane on a flat car that the railroad used for work on any place they had, like under bridges and whatnot. It was a specialized crane, and it was perfect for the car deck because they had to come in with this low crane and pick up the empty Pelledow car, take it out.
Yeah, I always was curious how they got that out of there after being toppled over like that.
So the crew, in order to get out of the flicker to go on walks, they had to use the emergency escape hatches till they finally got that rail car off. But the upshot of it was, for that 2 days, you stood your watch and go home, which is unusual because we're running year round, and the boat would be in for 2 days. That's the only time you get home 2 hours. That's the only time you would be able to go home is during that 2 hours. The rest of the time you're in and out. In and out. There's no schedule, in and out. You load, unload, in and out. So that was neat for us because we could go home.
Wow, yeah.
So that was the only upshot of it. But that's what winter sailing is like.
I was familiar with that story, and I didn't know all those details. I appreciate you sharing, but I never thought about like the cleanup or the potential hazard of it, and how crazy is that? Because like I said, I have seen pictures, and I'm always thought like, wow, like that would have been something to see, let alone hear it, be underneath it.
Yes, I'll never forget the noise that thing
I can imagine.
When it tipped over, and it wasn't very far from my bunk either when it tipped over. So I got the full brunt of the noise.
Wow.
Now, when MWT took over the CNO, MWT was Michigan-Wisconsin Transportation.
Yeah.
Local business over. Glenn Bowden was responsible for getting that started. So when they took over, they tried to run 2 boats, but they didn't have enough business, so they continued running 1 boat, and it was Ludington to Kewanee for 7 years until they went bankrupt. And then when they shut down, we all thought that was the end of it for the Carferries.
Yeah.
Carferries are all done. So everybody spread out. Some of the guys went to saltwater ships, some guys went to the Lakers, a few guys even had time to retire.
Oh, yeah.
So I ended up going on the Lakers. Now, I was on a 1,000-foot ship that we laid up in Toledo, and it was late January. Now, after I'd been home for about 2 weeks, I got a call from Jean McCumber. Now, she was the HR person for MWT.
Oh, okay.
Now, she asked if I wanted to come back to work on the Badger for another company.
Wow, and you probably never thought you'd get that call.
I started laughing at her over the phone. I'm laughing at her. I says, come on, you're joking.
Right.
Carferries are done. And she says, no, I'm not joking. She really meant it. She said that it's for real. A fellow by the name of Conrad bought the boats, and he wants to put 1 back on the run. I says, really?
Yeah.
I says, well, yeah,
right.
Count me in. I was one of the first 10 people that got hired.
That's exciting.
Because they had to get engine people in to start putting the boat back together, because they'd been all taken apart to lay it up, and that's where it sat for 2 years. There's a lot of work to be done to get the thing back together. Before the Coast Guard inspection even came down. So there was a lot of work. So they got the first 10 people they hired were engineering people, and all right, get to work, start putting that thing back together. So ultimately, she was able to get about 70% of the crew back.
Wow, that's really impressive.
Sailed with the last company.
70%, that's awesome.
And now at that point, my daughter was less than a year old.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, getting back on the Carferries is a lot more appealing than sailing on the Lakers, because
for sure,
you might not see home for 2 months.
Exactly, and that's a big commitment
Yes.
in and of itself.
So we were happy when Mr. Conrad stepped in and resurrected the service to what it is today.
That's awesome.
And it was, as far as what was the changeover like between the rail car ferry days and what they have now, it was definitely different going from a year-round operation, hauling rail cars and working 20 on and 8 off, to working 7 days a week.
Yeah.
Because it's basically a mom and pop operation and one boat, and it's a short operation compared to the Lakers. So
Right.
it you couldn't really take time off.
Definitely.
And they would have had to hire a lot more people for relief people. And the guys decided, well, 7 days, we'll put up with it because it's a relatively short season.
Right. Yeah, going from May to October.
So it wasn't too bad. And also being in the engine crew, being local, we had extensive winter work list. It was like having a shore job. So as soon as you laid the boat up,
Yeah.
you got into the winter work list, and we call it a lunch bucket job. Just
Right.
like having a shore job. So, and you had the weekends off, so that made up for the fact that during the season you were pretty much every day.
Right.
So, and when the boat no longer carried rail cars, it was a lot quieter for the engine crew that lived down in the flicker.
I'm
under the
sure.
car. There's nothing like having a 100-pound jack taken off a rail car and dropped on the deck right over your bunk. That'll bring you out of a deep sleep pretty quick.
I can imagine.
Also, having anything on wheels that you can think of going across on the boat was a lot more interesting than seeing rail cars.
Oh, true.
Day after day, nothing but
Yeah, I
rail
didn't think
cars.
about that. Yeah. Yeah, because we do see some amazing vehicles on board.
Yes, well, since you've been here, you've seen a lot of stuff go on that boat, a lot of interesting stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Like we would see, a couple of times we took circuses across.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of the circuses sailing.
They'd have,
That would be cool.
They'd have a number of trucks with everything the circus needed. One of them was the 3-ring circus, so they had, I'll bet a third of the car deck was full of circus-related vehicles.
That's crazy.
Now, when I came out of the engine room one time, I didn't know that there was a circus.
Oh, gosh.
I got off watch, I come up out of the engine room, boat's underway. I'm walking down the deck heading towards the flicker, and there was a semi sitting here, and it had these small ventilation type doors, maybe 2 foot by 2 foot.
Yeah.
I think there were 3 of them across the top of the truck, and they're open. And I thought, they must be for ventilation, but they had to go up there somehow and open these things up. Didn't pay much attention to it. As I'm walking down the deck, and all of a sudden, something comes out. It startled me a little bit. It was like this snake-looking thing came up out of that. It was an elephant trunk.
Really? That's
That's
crazy.
the first time I found out that, we got a circus on the boat.
Yeah, that's not something you see just every day.
No. So that was neat to see. And the Clydesdales,
Yeah.
Budweiser Clydesdales, they went across 2 different times while I was on the boats. And that was always interesting.
Yeah,
Because
and if I ever wanted to be a horse, that is the horse I would want to be, because they are very pampered, very well taken care of. It was very special to have them ride with us, but they're pampered, I guess, is probably a light word for
yeah,
it.
that's a light word. They're very, very well taken care of. So that was neat because we had access to the horses because they had their handlers were down there.
Oh,
so we'd come
yeah.
up and talk to them. So it was just a handful of crew down there talking to the
neat.
handlers. So it was just us.
That's awesome. Yeah, not all the
and
crowds of people.
So
What a cool opportunity.
that kind of stuff was neat after the railroad days. It was neat to see everything that goes across now.
Yeah.
And there was a time where we brought across a brigade from the Wisconsin National Guard, and they were going to Grayling.
Yeah.
They chartered the boat, so it was going to have nothing on it but Army trucks.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And that was the quickest time the boat ever unloaded.
I can imagine.
Because they had, they told them to all go down and start all their trucks. And they had an MP on the apron and another MP in the parking lot, so they directed them off. And they started pulling off. They weren't more than 5 or 6 feet apart. Boom, boom, boom.
Yeah.
I've never seen a boat unload
Well, it's
that
funny
quick.
you say it. Last summer I had some Army personnel sail, and they showed up to my office one day in full uniform, and they're like, "You're not a," and I was talking with them, and they're like, "You're not intimidated by people showing up, full uniform like this." And I said, "Trust me, we see all different kinds of vehicles. That something new, but it's not exactly new."
Another one was the 100th anniversary of Harley Davidson.
Oh, I've heard a lot of stories.
Chartered the boat. They found out there was a particular day the reservations were really piling up for motorcycles. So they decided, okay, I guess we're going to have the whole boat nothing but motorcycles because there's so many coming across. That was another neat thing to see.
Well, it's funny you say that, and we're talking about the Badger's 70 year this year. This year's the Harley Davidson 120th, and I've had some conversations with them that I know exactly what you're talking about because I've seen a lot of pictures. That's pretty cool to see the whole car deck full of motorcycles.
No, that was a trip to see that because I ride bikes myself, so of course I was right in the middle of that.
Right. No, that's cool.
Walking through them, looking at all the bikes. Some of them came from Germany.
Oh, wow.
For that particular run.
Oh, that's so cool.
They still had their German license plates on them. They had visas and all that stuff, everything they needed.
Wow.
But they actually brought their bikes from Germany just to do that. And they came from New York State. They decided to take the boat across to go to Milwaukee.
Wow, that's awesome.
Now, also the fact that under LMC, the boat was on a set schedule. Whereas during the railroad days, as soon as the summer scheduled runs were over, the boats ran wild, as they called it, meaning you went where the freight was.
Oh, yeah. That makes sense.
The freight runs dictated where you went and when you went there.
Yeah.
So running wild means you're coming in and out of port all times of the day and night.
For sure, yeah.
There's no schedule. So it would be, you'd be tying up, like I said, all times of the day and night. And, if you're on watch or if it was 3 o'clock in the morning, you couldn't go home. So
yeah, that would be
it was
crazy.
kind of nice that when LMC took over, ever since they've had set schedule, you can actually make plans.
Right, yeah, and have
the
that
boat was always,
life
the
around
boat
work.
stays on the same schedule all the time.
Yeah.
That was one neat thing about changing over to LMC from the railroad days.
Yeah, I guess I never thought about that. I knew that the routes could change, but I never thought about a set schedule. I bet that would have been really nice.
Well, back then they had 3 ports in Wisconsin.
Right.
So we had 3 different places to go, and it was a 4-hour run to Manitowoc, 4.5-hour run to Kewanee, 6-hour run to Milwaukee.
Yeah, and that could definitely vary depending on how the day went and weather and everything. Wow.
So it was different that when LMC took over, that with a set schedule, like I said before, you could make plans.
Yeah.
So that was good for everybody that came from the old days. That schedule was more appealing, you could say.
Yeah.
So at any route, I stuck with LMC, stayed right put, and I found a home, as they say.
Yeah.
So I retired in 2014 after 22 years with LMC.
Wow, that's so awesome.
And
Good
that
for you.
pretty much covers it for me.
Yeah. Well, and I just think, when we look back at the history, and there's so many people that really dedicated their lives. I mean, you talk about having a family and, finding a home on a car ferry, that I can really appreciate your dedication and just keeping the Badger going, because it's pretty cool to sit here today at 70 years and talk about that history she has, but the bright future that she has as well. So I thank you. But what I really want to ask you as we wrap this up a little bit, talking about the 70 years of service in 2023, how does it feel to be a part of that legacy of the Badger?
Well, I really enjoyed it. I'm glad I was a part of it. I could have went with any steamship company anywhere, but once I started sailing out of Ludington and the Carferries, like I said before, I found a home.
Yeah.
And I was glad to be part of it.
Well, we're glad that you could be a part of it. And just, wow, how impressive of a story that I so appreciate you sharing today. That thank you for all you've done.
Thanks for calling me in. I appreciate it.
Of course, you're very welcome. And now, a word about our partners in our port cities. If your idea of the perfect vacation is sugar sand beaches, clear blue waters along 28 miles of Lake Michigan shoreline, outdoor adventures, climbing to the top of historic lighthouses, or exploring a charming downtown, Ludington is your destination for pure Michigan fun. Ludington's unspoiled natural resources offer the quintessential up-north experience, all within easy reach, located at the intersection of US 31 and US 10. No matter what you're seeking, a beach or outdoor adventure, a peaceful getaway, or just a community of friendly faces, you can find it all in pure Ludington. As a Ludington native, I know I sound biased, but Ludington is truly an astonishing place. There's always something going on, amazing places to dine and get drinks, along with unique attractions you won't find just anywhere. Plan your visit today at pureludington.com. Manitowoc, the maritime capital of Wisconsin, is the perfect vacation destination for those seeking adventure, a little relaxation, or a whole lot of fun. With sandy beaches, miles of biking and hiking trails, a real World War II submarine that you can both climb aboard and sleep on, a strong art scene, variety of breweries to explore, and array of annual events and festivals, Manitowoc offers so many unique and exciting options for visitors to add to their travel itinerary. As a frequent visitor to Manitowoc, I can attest to the thriving and charming downtown. From classic candy and ice cream parlors to outdoor music venues, there's so much to explore, experience, and enjoy in Manitowoc. I always look forward to going back. Start planning your getaway to Manitowoc, Wisconsin at visitmanitowoc.com.